Good evening, visitors, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Sharon Bown, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Warrant Officer Jeff Banning. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that continue to serve, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors and by students on behalf of the following schools. From South Australia, Investigator College, Goolwa. From New South Wales, Nowra High School, Nowra. If you are able, would you please be upstanding for the national anthem?
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is birth by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty rich and rare. In history's page let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Boys and girls, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had done and what they had endured for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard their record, which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Harold Mowatt Belstead. Harold Belstead was born in 1892 in the Melbourne suburb of Carlton, the eldest of three children born to George and Agnes Belstead. When Belstead was a child, the family moved to Mount Hawthorn in Perth, where he attended the local state school. He later worked as a letter carrier. Belstead enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force on the 8th of March 1915. His younger brother George signed up a week later, and the two brothers served together in the newly formed 28th Infantry Battalion. The Belstead brothers sailed from Fremantle in June 1915, and after a brief period of training in Egypt, landed with their battalion on Gallipoli. They had been in the trenches for less than a month when George Belstead was shot in the knee in an area of the battlefield known as the Apex. He was evacuated to hospital and eventually medically discharged. He would take no further part in the Great War. Harold Belstead stayed on Gallipoli and served on the peninsula until December 1915, when he evacuated with the rest of the Australian forces for Egypt. Belstead trained with his unit in Egypt until March 1916, when they sailed for France and the war on the Western Front. Soon after arriving in Marseille, they travelled to northern France near Armentières. Belstead and the 28th Battalion took part in their first major action in the Battle of Pozières, north of the River Somme. In this battle, Australian troops of the 1st Division had been involved in heavy fighting since the 23rd of July, and in 5 days suffered over 5,200 casualties. The Australian 2nd Division, of which Belstead's unit was part, joined the battle on the 28th of July and was soon to suffer similar terrible losses. On the night of the 28th and 29th of July 1916, Australian forces laid a heavy bombardment on the German lines, hoping to damage their defences, especially the thick barbed wire entanglements that crossed no man's land. As the Australian troops waited in preparation for their advance, they came under heavy German high explosives and shrapnel retaliatory fire and suffered heavy casualties. Shortly after midnight, Belstead and the 28th Battalion climbed out of their trenches onto the battlefield and advanced on the German trenches in the face of heavy artillery, rifle and machine gun fire. As the men crossed no man's land, they found that their artillery fire had failed to destroy the German barbed wire defences. Under heavy enemy fire, they attempted to find ways around and to cut through the wire, but to no avail. They were eventually ordered to withdraw. The Australian 2nd Division suffered 2,000 casualties on this night alone. Belstead survived Pozières and spent the rest of the year serving in France and Belgium, enduring the terrible conditions of the coldest winter in living memory. On the 25th of April 1917, 2 years after Australian forces first landed on Gallipoli, the 28th Battalion was in the process of being relieved from duty in support trenches when Belstead was struck by enemy machine gun fire. He received severe wounds to his left leg and was taken to a nearby casualty clearing station for treatment. He died from his wounds later that day. He was 24 years old. He is buried in the Grevillers British Cemetery in France, where over 2,100 soldiers of the First World War are now commemorated. His gravestone is carved with the words, "In memory of our dear son, ever remembered by his parents in Australia." Private Harold Mowatt Belstead. His name is listed on the roll of honour to my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Harold Mowatt Belstead, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you all for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.